And our keynote speaker is Pastor Jeff Parziale from Pantano Christian Church. I've known Jeff for a number of years. Both he and his wife, Judi, have dedicated themselves in their lives to helping people. And he was the family pastor at Pantano for a while, but they realized that he had a lot more talent than just family, so they have elevated him. He's not senior pastor yet, but he's kind of the junior senior pastor. Okay?
Senior in age.
Senior in age. But he has been a marriage and family counselor for a number of years. Both he and his wife, Judi, have had a ministry to step parents and step families called InStep Ministries. And as a pastor at Pantano, he knows what's happening with families in our community. And we invited Jeff to come today and just kind of share with us what the state of the family is today. And then we're going to be sharing a couple of testimonies with you from different ministries in town that will be able to help us see what we can do to try and address some of these areas. So would you please welcome with me Dr. Jeff Parziale.
Great to be here. I was joking with someone that I could just, in one word, tell you the state of the family in America. It's horrible. But then we could all just go get ice cream. There's a lot to say, and in the interest of time, I'll try to keep this to less than an hour.
Yeah, less than.
You know, and I'm extremely ADHD, so if you need to ask me a question, that'd be great. I'd love to be interrupted, and then I'll lose track, but I have some notes, so we'll get back on schedule. Probably the most important thing I can tell you is that the new normal now in marriage and family is not the traditional nuclear family. Matter of fact, at last count, the traditional nuclear family, mom, dad, brother, sister, dog, cat, represented about 16% of families in America. You probably have 100 million single adults. Lots and lots of non-traditional types of families. You have step families, single parent families, adoptive families, foster families, same-sex families, grandparents raising their grandchildren, which is monstrous and growing in leaps and bounds. Maybe perhaps the fastest growing group is grandparents raising their grandkids. Multi-generational families, and of course cohabiting families. And because we don't know what to do with cohabiting families, our statistics are really skewed. They could be, we call them, sometimes we'll treat them as a single parent family, sometimes we'll treat them as a step family, but we don't really know how to keep them statistically in line. So we don't have great numbers on the number of these kinds of families, but we do know that the number of cohabitating couples in the United States is just exploding. Just some quick stats, and then we'll sort of go a little deeper. The number of single moms, for example, in America has increased by close to 50%. Single dads have increased by 99%. People living alone have increased by 36%. Married couple households at those same time frames increased by 9%. There's a 40% increase in multi-generational households, probably a 70%, 50 to 60 to 70% increase in grandparents raising their grandkids. What's interesting in our culture is adolescence, which didn't even exist a century ago. Now they tell us it lasts from age 10 to about age 26. So we have a 16-year adolescent period that before Sigmund Freud and his cohorts joined us didn't even exist. There wasn't even such a thing as adolescence. It's our creation. And of course we've done, like we've done with everything else, we've made it into a monster. Now you have lots and lots of kids. If we had basements in Arizona, they'd all be living in our basements. Fortunately we don't. I've never wanted to live in a house with a basement for that reason. So that my kids could live there. So so what we know in a nutshell is marriage is down. The number of marriages in America are way down. And divorce is down too, very slightly. But that's good news and bad news. The bad news is that there's so many cohabiting couples that there's less divorces generally happening. Cohabitation is up, single parenting is up. Here's some stats. Barely 50% of us in America are married, compared to just in 1960, 72%. So we've seen a dramatic decrease in the number of families that are married. We have the highest divorce rate of any industrialized country, and the main reason, and Randy would appreciate this, is narcissism. Most of us, we are the most self-centered country in the world. We live in a culture, and you guys out there know this already. Consumerism and narcissism are monstrous. Matter of fact, we're producing less and less children. More married couples are choosing not to have kids so they can spend more time self-aggrandizing, doing the things for themselves that they want to do. So the culture of the past, where people got married so they could procreate, so they could raise kids and have a legacy, those days are probably looking at an end. That is so different. And so the challenge for the church, even though I have this at the end, the challenge for the church is how do we deal with these changes like that? In family ministry and some of the ministries where we deal with families, we've all built those ministries around the traditional nuclear family. We assume that that's sort of what was going to happen, and each generation would produce that. Well, that's not true anymore. We went through this culture shift a few years ago with step families and single-parent families, where lots of us didn't know what to do with them. How do you handle that? They aren't traditional. They have different needs. They have different challenges. And we've embraced that. Most of the churches in Tucson have really embraced those kinds of families. Well, the shift that's happening now is away from families having children. Probably 60% of the couples now that are marrying have a cohabiting experience. And so if you're doing marriage prep in your church, you're seeing lots and lots of couples coming to you that have been cohabiting for some period of time. Lots of them even have children by the time they come in and say it's time to get married. And for many of them, that doesn't surprise them. Matter of fact, I remember talking to a group once about the fact that if I was a woman, I wouldn't cohabit. And the reason why is, so obviously, I want somebody that was going to make a commitment to me. And I had a young couple that said, well, what's the big deal? And I said, well, just take God out of the equation. Just look at pure psychology. Why would you want to spend time with a person who is unwilling to make a commitment to you? And why would you do that? It doesn't make sense to me. And yet, that was offensive. And so we have a new culture coming up now that really wants fairness, social justice, is very immune to some of the things that you and I experience. I'm going to be, when's your birthday, Steve?
Me 18.
Mine too. But my dimensions are slightly different. So if you buy things a little big for him, I'll take it. Isn't that amazing? We must be the same age as him.
62.
I'm actually a year older than you.
I figured.
And you look a lot older than me. Sorry. I couldn't resist that. Roger told me good, and I did that for about 5 minutes. That's about as long as I can go. 25% of the women in our country that have more than one child have them with different men. It's not unusual anymore for females to present with several children with multiple fathers. We are seeing a shift in the balance of women working and men staying home. That's becoming more and more prevalent. So we're seeing these giant changes in our culture. The age for marriage, for example, is the highest it's ever been. We are now seeing the average age of marriage is 28 for men and 26 for women. That's the highest it's ever been in the history of the United States. People are marrying older and older and older. Why? Well, number one reason is because adolescence lasts. They finally grow out of adolescence about 26, 27. And we know from neurologists that our brain finally finishes developing about that age too. Mine hasn't quite got there yet, but for most 26 or 27-year-old men, they finally, the frontal lobe finally closes together and the brain cells all connect, and they start making good judgments. And hopefully. And so we're seeing this, and they're reluctant because they don't believe in marriage anymore. As an institution, you and I grew up believing in it. We believed that it was a good thing, that it was great for us, and there's still a lot of research that suggests that married couples are happier. You know, you've read the material. Married couples have better sex than people who aren't married. They live longer, and you know, they report that they're happier and their life is happier. So we have lots of that research. But again, against all of that, people, and even when they interview teenagers and say, how do you feel about getting married? About 80% of them feel good about it. But the one thing that they've also discovered is most of them don't believe that there's such a thing as lifetime marriage. That idea is really going to die with most of us, that there's going to be a lifetime marriage. We've introduced things like starter marriages now, where people just sort of practice on it for a while, and then they hopefully they'll get better at it, and then you go to the next one, and hopefully by the third or fourth they really got it down pat. And so those are trends that we are seeing that we as a church now have to embrace. And one of the things that I'm absolutely convinced of is the biggest mistake the church can make is to isolate ourselves from those things. I think, is there a daycare on the other side of the wall? Oh my gosh. Now see, I'm totally off. I've been totally distracted. Another thing we're seeing in marriage is that we've lost the middle class. It used to be that the middle class was the bastion of marriage and family. You know, they were the salt of the earth. They represent between 50 and 60% of us. But in terms of marriage, traditional marriage, the middle class is going away. And we're seeing more and more of a bimodal divide. We're seeing college-educated people now being the ones who have marriages that make it and that last and that report being healthy. The middle class is now reporting that they are less likely to be in stable marriages. Now that's a monstrous change that's just really happened over the last 20 years. Divorce rates are up for we call these the moderately educated. Middle class folks in this case are people who have something slightly less than a college degree. So many blue collar. But stable, salt of the earth folks, up until 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, were very stable, strong traditional marriages. They're voting differently now. They are divorcing at higher rates. There's a higher level of cohabitation, more children being born outside of marriage. All of those things are happening now in that big midsection. And for most of us in churches, that's primarily who inhabits our pews, is this giant middle class. And so what we're seeing are people who are not any longer invested in the beliefs that marriage is a good thing, that it's going to last, that it needs to be for life, that you need to sacrifice for your partner, that you need to sacrifice for your children. Those kinds of ideas are now becoming more and more passé. Divorce findings. The divorce rate is probably double than it was in 1960. You all know the history of divorce. You know, it's always been growing since we began in the United States, but it really skyrocketed in 1980 when unbeknownst to him, Ronald Reagan signed into law a no-fault divorce bill in California. And it sent shockwaves through the whole country. Within a few years, every state had adopted a no-fault divorce. And divorce rates spiked around the 80s, and now they've been coming down ever since. And part of that reason is cohabitation is so high. But now for the average couple getting married today, there's about a 43% chance that they'll get divorced. And it depends. Statistics are funny, but that's probably about as close as we're going to get. Cohabitation, between 1960 and 2010, the number of unmarried couples living together has increased 17-fold. Now, if anybody knows math, what is it? Is that 1,700%? Okay, that's a big number. A jump of 1,700% between 1960 and 2010 in the number of unmarried couples living together. 25% of unmarried women are currently living with a partner, and I've said this before, but more than 60% of first marriages are now preceded by cohabitation, compared to virtually zero 50 years ago. Zero. So we've seen this go from zero in the 60s, you know, to 60% in our lifetime, on our watch. On our watch, we've seen that happen. You know, we have to own some of this because that's what's happening. Now, we've got a big culture, and they're making huge shifts. But on our watch, we've seen this go from 0 to 60%. Now, I know at our church, and I'm sure at your church, we spend a lot of time on premarital prep. We work really hard to get couples ready. We give them marriage mentors. We walk with them in every way we can. But what's happening is that they're walking in our doors already with preconceived notions about marriage and family. They're far more selfish. They're far less willing to make commitments to one another. They don't really get sacrificed very well. And for many of them, they've been cohabitating, and they're believers, and they don't even understand how that works in terms of their faith. And when you challenge them on that, they can get pretty defensive because they don't get it. And it's, you really have to decide how you're going to play that out. That may be a great discussion for you guys to have. How do we talk about something as deep and important as living by God's principles with someone who really thinks that they're sort of open for interpretation? And that's what we're dealing with. We've got a culture now that really wants to embrace lots of different faiths, lots of different ways to come to God. And so it plays out in marriage and family. Why wouldn't it? It plays out in every other area of life. And so there's a lot of ambivalence around what's really truth. And so if you have to really have a debate over what's truth, you're going to have a tough time with marriage and family, getting people prepared for marriages. Fragile families, which is an important topic for research at the federal level. And typically, when they say fragile family, that means fatherless family. In the last few years, that has gone up 300%, a 300% increase in fragile families. The absentee father syndrome is clear. It's clear. My dad left when I was 2, and things were okay till my mom married an alcoholic stepdad who was a child, who was so damaged by his own father, his alcoholic father, that he didn't know how to parent. But lots of us have those kinds of stories. And so, in a sense, we are asking children to grow up fast and act like adults. And not only to marry, but then to parent children who will grow up to be adults. And somehow as a church, we have to be challenged by how do we do that better? Because again, all these things are happening on our watch. 70% of kids, it's predicted, will live at some point in their life in a single parent home. 70%. Step families, it used to be predicted that half of all families would be step families. We've backed off on that number because cohabitation has exploded so much. But we really don't know, again. We don't know how many of those are single parent families, how many are step families. In 1960, less than 9% of children lived in a single parent home all the time. And now it's well over 25%. It's probably pushing 30%. So when they look at fragile families, when we look at family systems, the biological family clearly is the healthiest for children. Single-parent families are the second healthiest. Step families are the third healthiest. They're not really very healthy. And then finally, cohabitating families are the worst. They're the most toxic for children. And the reason is there's no level of commitment. 50% of cohabitating couples don't make it to the altar. At some point, they break apart. And normally, they will have children. And so those, whether you're married or not, children don't get that. That doesn't equate psychologically. You're together, now you're not together. So whether it's a piece of paper or not, they're still wounded. And so we're dealing with generations of wounded children. And we talk about God as Father, and for lots of those children, that means zero to them. Because God as Father sounds like a guy that abandoned me, and that he's just a paycheck, and I haven't seen him in a long time. Or for me, I have a picture of me sitting on the steps waiting for my dad to come, and he never does. And so relating to God as Father is sort of tough. And so we have a generation or two of children who are wondering, what does that really mean to me? How do I connect with God if God is Father and my father wasn't around? I'm sorry, Steve. Oh, I have 5 minutes. Oh, that's what it was. You didn't have a question. I thought you were waving at me. Okay, we have the same birthday, and that doesn't mean anything. What can we do? Let's just go right to that. I've got tons and tons more material. When they look at the 10 factors, the 10 social, cultural factors that help marriages be stable, I'll just share that faith and beliefs are very important. So there's a role for us. Families that enter into marriage and family with a strong faith do infinitely better on all research into these. There's so many other things, and if you want that information, let me know. I'll email it to you. I wish I was more of an expert on what we can do instead of where we are. I think that we've got to get in the game. We cannot afford to be isolationists. We can't afford to sit in our ivory towers and hold on to our values. We have to get dirty. We have to get messy. And we have to get involved with people where they live. Jesus modeled that in the incarnation, didn't he? He pitched his tent around us, and that's what the Message version says of John 1, excuse me. We've got to work with fragile families. They're obvious. You know, there's no dad, but there's step families, there's single parent families. We've got to identify them in our churches, and we have to come alongside of them. We have to get really serious about premarital preparation. We just can't afford not to do that. And I think we've got to catch these folks sooner. When Judi and I were running InStep Ministries, which is sort of now kind of dormant, but we were working with helping churches understand how to work with step families and single parent families. It was obvious that these families were getting married so broken and so damaged, and they hadn't learned anything from their experience. And so we wrote a book called Developing Healthy Relationships, simply because if we could catch these folks before they got married the first time, and we could teach them about how to get healthy, maybe, you know, and I know Randy's written some material on this too, but maybe we can stop this epidemic. But my experience is that not only first time, but subsequent marriages, they are clueless about what's going on. We have a responsibility, I think, to make sure that we invest in them. Now, maybe they'll walk away and they'll say, well, that's too much work, I'm going somewhere else. Okay, but maybe we could develop an agreement together that we wouldn't do that. That if I won't marry him at Pantano, you won't marry him at your church either. You know, maybe we'll find a way to say we are so invested in you having a healthy marriage that we, pastors in Tucson, will not marry you unless you go through a process. We're not just going to be, you know, marriage, I can't think of the word. Factories. Thank you. And so those are the kinds of things. How much do I do? Those are the things that we can do. We can join together and we can have these kind of conversations, say, well, what can we do together to make a difference in our city? You've got to start somewhere. Look at this organization of Fort Tucson. We have so many cool things going on. And yet my awareness is that I know when I try to get together with other family pastors at that time, we can get any success at all. You know, maybe that's changed now. Maybe our atmosphere's changed. But we have got to figure out ways to talk with one another so that we do the very best we can to prepare people for lifetime marriage. And we need to model that for them. They need to see that model in us. That faith has to be real. So, you know, those are some of the things we can do. We've got to look at how we do family ministry. We just can't use the nuclear family model anymore. It doesn't fit for the majority of the people that you and I are seeing every day. But they need to hear our truth. And so Jesus was a perfect embodiment of truth and grace. And that's what we need to be too. So I'll stop there. If you want more information, just email me. I'll send you this. God bless you guys.
Thank you very much, Jeff. We appreciate you and your commitment to marriage and family.